bosses and managers of Reddit, what was your worst employee like? So, the worst employee you can have isn't the one that does anything egregious enough to get fired, but manages to make every single workday that much more aggravating. The worst guy I had the attention span of a gnat. You had to write down instructions for everything, even for tasks that he had done a million times before, and check in on him every 15 minutes or so. And yet, given these parameters, he'd complete perfect work. Every year during performance reviews, we'd argue about whether or not to keep him on, and every year, we'd keep him on. Because the devil, at least we knew how to manage him, and he was manageable, so there was that. Next story. Lazy, incompetent, couldn't handle any criticism, and she stole my food. She was very overweight, and everything I ate, she would stare down and be like, "Oh my god, that looks so good." As for me, I was the manager of a very small business. Just me and 2 girls under me, so we spent a lot of time together. She would talk about how she couldn't buy groceries or keep her utilities on, but she wanted to have another baby, and she was cheating on her husband too. I hated her so much it gave me anxiety. She effed up my business too because of her mistakes, and our clients hated her. I eventually told my boss it was her or me. Boss didn't like confrontation, so I said okay and took a job elsewhere. The girl ended up getting fired, but it was too late. I wasn't going to stick around after that. Oh, and several times she took her antipsychotic meds during the day. I think they were meant to be taken at nighttime. She slept through the phone ringing one time and me yelling her name because I needed help. Ugh, I get mad just thinking about it. And if you read this, Haley, you are a garbage person. Okay, Haley, I can excuse the tax fraud, I can excuse the racism, but I cannot excuse eating other people's food. That is where any reasonable person would draw the line, so I'm glad that she got fired, and yeah, she needs to take her meds. Anyway, next story. So, the company I work for is pretty hard to get into, even if you have an impressive resume or an awesome reference. Unfortunately, we had a new client. In one quarter, his business would keep our lights on for about 10 years. He asked if his cousin or little nephew could have an entry-level position at our company, and we reluctantly said yes. Well, the kid surfed the web all day looking at cars to buy. Whenever we'd ask him if he completed a task, he'd either lie to us and say he did it, or say he didn't know how to do it and didn't want to bother any of us for help. Then he brought in all of his gaming systems into the conference room, saying that clients could play them while they waited, which would have been nice, but he played games in the conference room all day long anyway. So it came to a point where we gave him the least amount of work to do, ordering paper, delivering lunch, etc. Then 2 years later, the client comes to us and says that he's going to have his nephew handle the work he was giving us for him, helping him start his own consulting firm. Well, apparently the kid lied like no other, making his uncle believe that he was helping run our company. 3 months later, he came back to us for our business. Nephew tried hiring a consulting firm to the side to do his work so he could play Sonic the Hedgehog all day. Next story. When I was stationed at Fort Hood, a handful of guys from my unit, including me, were chosen to be lifeguard for the public pools on Fort Hood and for the area of Lake Belton's beach that Fort Hood was in charge of. So for the first half of summer, I worked the afternoon shift. I showed up with everyone else on my shift and walked over to one of the stands to relieve that guy. While I was walking over, I scanned the water just to be sure, and I saw a kid who was struggling, but he had an adult next to him, so I wasn't too concerned. I walked out to the water and stood there for a second, scanning the water, but paying attention to that kid. Then that adult starts screaming, "He's drowning!" And I go out, get the kid on the red floaty thing, can't remember what it's called, it's been a couple of years, and bring him back to shore. He was fine, just pressed his luck trying to test his swimming skills, and the adult was actually a teenage brother who was also a weak swimmer. The point of saying all of that is that when I looked up, expecting the other soldier lifeguard to be off of his stand and up next to us, he was passed out. He was leaning so far to the right, I'm surprised he didn't fall the F out of his chair. I was a corporal/CPL at the time, and that guy was a specialist/SPC. Same pay grade, different rank. As a CPL, I had authority over him, and boy did I effing use that authority that day. I became his personal trainer for a few hours, and he was supposed to be off work around 1:30, 2 p.m., but I made him stay on shift until 7:30 p.m. because of that. It was sweeter for me because it was a Friday, and I knew he had plans that night. Not anymore, jerkhead. Next story. Back in grad school, I ended up being the senior grad student, largely because my professor was an incompetent idiot and all the other senior grad students quit, but I was basically the lab manager, in addition to handling my own research. Eventually, the professor hired a new grad student. If I recall, his name was Matt. Matt was one of those people whose default expression was slack-jawed, gormless imbecility. When you spoke to him, gave advice or instruction, he'd just stare at you with this vacant expression and then just turn away, never acknowledging a thing you said. Matt was a rolling disaster from pretty much day one. He constantly destroyed equipment. For example, he destroyed several $100s of non-magnetic steel tweezers for TEM sample work by taking them all out of their custom carrying cases and just tossing them point down in a glass beaker, destroying their tips. When called out on doing this, he just shrugged and wordlessly stared at me. Oh, he would also bring in his crappy evangelical Christian rock music and play it on the lab stereo until I and the other students just got rid of that stereo to not have to listen to that crap. And crappy, not just because it was evangelical Christian music, it's not my thing at all, but I'll grant that some of those bands can at least play well. This crap, though, was just awful. I'm pretty sure the guy was a young earther. The final straw, though, was one morning when I opened the lab and walked in and nearly ran right into an unsecured gas cylinder sitting in the middle of the lab aisleway. And for the uninitiated, gas cylinders must be secured when the heavy metal transport cap has been removed. The gas outlet at the top is fairly delicate, and if the cylinder falls over and that valve hits something, it will probably get torn off. This turns a heavy metal gas cylinder into an uncontrolled rocket, capable of punching through 6-inch concrete walls and turning people into red smears. It is serious crap. You do not remove the heavy metal transport cap until the cylinder is firmly attached to a sturdy wall clamp or other safety device. And again, this gas cylinder was just sitting in the middle of a walkway with a gas regulator on it and a clear plastic tube trailing over to a bench. A perfect setup for a cylinder getting knocked over and causing a disaster. And to add insult to this, the effing thing was literally a foot away from a cylinder tie-down that I had mounted to one of the lab benches. After my heart started again, I carefully walked up to the cylinder, grabbed it in a bear hug, and slowly walked it over to the clamp and secured it. Once I'd safed the cylinder, I examined it to try and figure out what was going on. And that's when I saw what was in it: hydrogen. The unsecured gas cylinder was full of hydrogen. If it had fallen over and hit the regulator on any of the benches all around it, it would have turned into a rocket that would have started punching holes through walls all through a busy building with over 50 scientists working inside and leaving behind a trail of hundreds of cubic feet of explosive hydrogen gas. Any flame or spark would have then detonated the hydrogen gas like a fuel-air explosive bomb. This thing could have easily killed me and most of the people in the building. And at this point, I'm on the warpath. I'm seeing red. I storm over to the neighboring building where some of the other grad students were at and demanded to know who had done such a mind-bogglingly stupid thing. They were all pretty appalled and told me it wasn't them, but one mentioned that good old Matt had been talking about needing hydrogen gas for some nanoparticle reduction experiments. Now, keep in mind that this sort of experiment needs maybe a few cubic feet of hydrogen gas, a tiny fraction of the volume of the full-sized bomb cylinder that had been in the lab. He could have just ordered a tiny benchtop-sized lecture bottle that is far safer and had more than enough gas. And at this point, I wanted blood. And I spent the next hour or so scouring the 3 buildings of my department looking for Matt, ready to beat the living crap out of him the minute I laid eyes on him. I'm pretty sure the other grad students warned him to make himself scarce. And after I couldn't find him, I went to the professor and basically told him that it was either me or Matt. Then Matt left a week or so later and I never saw him again. And Matt, if you ever read this, you are a stupid, irresponsible sack of crap that nearly killed an entire building full of people. And if I ever see you again, I'll punch your slack-jawed, proto-humanoid face out of the back of your skull. So, I don't condone violence in these videos, but I certainly won't stop it from happening. Sounds like Matt kinda deserves it. Potential murder, 50, 60 people, you know what? Sometimes you deserve to get punched in the face. But that's just my opinion. Next story. So, we were hospital aides at an inpatient floor. So we changed incontinent patients, did vitals, helped patients walk to and from the bathroom or chairs, that kind of stuff. Nurses depended on us to do our jobs so they could do theirs. Well, this one girl would avoid doing any work she could. She'd constantly hide in one of the back nursing stations and hunker down where she couldn't be seen and read. She'd ignore call bells for select patients who were known to be incontinent and messy, just sit and read while the bell went off and waited for one of the other girls to grab it. She was allotted a 30-minute break and constantly took up an hour. When she was training a new girl, she encouraged the same work avoidance behavior. Then she got busted for falsifying vitals. She was upset that she couldn't take her break on her schedule, so when she did go, she was gone for an hour and a half. She came back after the second round of vitals for her shift was due, so instead of getting her ass in gear, she made them up, manually typed bullcrap into the computer instead of taking vitals on the machine and saving them. They went to a Wi-Fi cloud to the chart, and what ended up happening was she put an average blood pressure measurement, I think 130/85, on a patient whose normal parameters were about 90/60. So the nurse sees this, notices the patient's blood pressure is 40 points higher than it should be, so she gives him a dose of BP meds. And as BP tanks, the patient nearly dies and it's a crap show. She eventually gets busted because our heart monitor tech suspected what had happened, gathered all the vitals machines, and printed out copies of every set of vitals that had been taken that evening. Even if you don't save it to the cloud under a patient's name, the machine saves it. None of the numbers matched the ones this girl put in the computer, which proved she hadn't done her job. And who knows how long she'd been doing that without getting caught. We'd get busy and lose track of her all the time. Because of that tech, though, the nurse wasn't in trouble and that aide got fired instead. Good riddance. Edit. She wasn't prosecuted. I strongly believe she should have. My bosses thought it was embarrassing and figured firing her was enough. Then, on the day she was fired, we had a pre-scheduled employee meeting. An hour before the evening shift started, she was late to that and was floated to another unit, so she flounced off before the bosses could say, wait, hold on a minute, let's talk. So she takes her purse to another unit, gets called back, gets shown the evidence, and she confesses and is fired. Has to walk back to the other unit to get her purse, though. Has to walk to our unit to get her coat and empty her locker. Had to wait for security to take her ID. The entire time she is sobbing. She wore a lot of makeup and looked like a disaster. It ended up being very public and embarrassing for her. The entire small hospital knew. She still deserved to be charged, but damn, I hope she learned something. Next story. Had a ranch hand I caught for animal abuse. I get a high school kid to work at my place every so often for those needed graduation community service hours. He needed like a whole day worth of hours for graduation, and it was a week before. His mom dropped him off in the morning. Luckily, I had enough crap to do that I could keep him busy for 10 hours on a Saturday. Got there at 6 a.m., obviously didn't want to be there. Got him to help me castrate males, meaning he just held them down while I did the stuff you need a skilled hand for. Then I give him the task of sorting ewes while I go fix a gate on the other side of the barn. Simple enough. Red chalk on the back goes out in the big pasture. Yellow chalk goes in the little pasture with one ram. Blue chalk goes in the pen with another ram. Simple enough. Just catch and sort. Well, I had one ewe called Felicia, cause she was a jerk, and she'd run from you and all you could say is, bye Felicia, and once you caught her, she'd fight you tooth and claw to get away. I don't know why she was this way, she just was. Anyway, I guess he had trouble getting her to move, and so he reared back and punched this sheep across the nose hard enough to knock out a tooth, which, trust me, takes a lot. I've seen one run face first, full speed into a wooden barn and not lose any teeth. And he knocked one out in one punch, and I was pissed. Pulled him inside, called his mom, sent him home, refused to sign off on his hours because I had to spend time to make sure she didn't get hurt worse than we thought. And I should note, Felicia died a year later, but just of old age. But she did eventually calm down, and that one missing tooth didn't get in her way too much. Okay, so I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I really don't know how to pronounce that word. I've never heard it before. Ewees? Ewoos? Ewe? Ewoos? I don't know. E-W-E? Whatever that word is. I don't know how to say it. The other narrator doesn't know how to say triage. I'm not hating. I'm just saying we don't know words sometimes, okay? We stumble. Everybody does. Next story. So, always late and always asked when he could take a break. Every day he had some injury which excused him from working hard like the other guys. He wanted to use a company truck to pick up a girl he was seeing to go to dinner. One day, he showed up at the job site at noon and said he had court that morning, never let me know, and had no paperwork to prove it. I fired him there on the spot, and I have no idea what he's doing now. Next story. Kid, 17, was under me. Didn't do what he was told, mouthed off, would hide, eventually got fired. Then, about 3 months later, groped a random lady in a nearby park, ran to the store to steal a car, tried to carjack a customer who stabbed him a few times, and he locked himself in the employee restroom to hide from the police. Next story. You really can't fire someone for being slow. Like, I guess you can, but you can't. I manage a restaurant, though. There are certain people who are just slow, and no amount amount of practice is going to change that. They just move at this pace that isn't conducive to working a cook line. You can do all the coaching in the world and it won't matter. There's this one guy we'll call Jordan. Jordan moves at the speed of mud. His mouth is always slacked open and he speaks in such a monosyllabic fashion that you'd wonder if he was a put-on. Now, we have Texas toast where I work. The procedure for dropping Texas toast is as follows. Pick up a piece of bread, brush garlic butter across the piece of bread, drop on flat top for 45 seconds, flip for an additional 45 seconds. Serve, the end. Simple. I can drop an entire loaf of Texas toast in under 20 seconds, followed by the two 45-second cook times. This is a simple procedure. Jordan stands there with his loose jaw flapping in the wind, meticulously placing garlic butter on every square inch of each piece of bread, resulting in one effing piece of toast being completely toasted by the time the next piece hits the flat top. I've gone over to him and demonstrated time and time again. Jordan, it's a quick process. Brush, drop, brush, drop, brush, drop, brush, drop. Hit timer, wait, flip, hit timer again, serve. He nods his head affirmatively, then proceeds to butter every square inch of the bread again. He walks 1 foot per minute to the fridge to grab cheese sticks to the drop in the fryer. He spends 5 solid minutes putting chicken on a plate. He's horrible. Half the time, I just tell him to go do the dishes. But I can't really fire him because technically he's not doing anything wrong exactly. He's just doing a poor version of the correct thing. Next story. I wasn't a boss, but I'll share this story. I worked at the Old Country Buffet while I was in college. I was a cashier. Free food and I didn't have to cook it. Well, my pothead roommate wanted a job, so I hooked him up with an interview and he got hired. I trained him on the register on his first day of the job. The next day, he was a no-call, no-show. He just flat out quit. When I got home, I asked him why he didn't come, and he said working there was too hard. The job was impossibly easy, though. Hi, welcome to OCB. How many in your party? Punch that number into register, read total, collect money, wave goodbye. Man, I miss the free food. Next story. Hired a kid, let's call him John, fresh out of school to help us. He would download adult content onto his phone and then go to the restroom to self-pleasure every hour or so. Whenever I'd go to the restroom, he was in the stall and I could hear the adult content playing loudly through his headphones. Then he would work until 2 in the morning to finish his work and then come into work looking like hell. He'd always get his work done, but he was a disaster. I saw him at his desk looking exhausted and noticed that his hands were waterlogged and wrinkled looking. Another time, we were all in the conference room and someone said, "Hey John, are you okay?" And I couldn't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that he was pleasuring himself under the conference room table. Thankfully, he eventually moved on to another firm after about a year. Before leaving, he wiped his hard drive disk completely so that the computer wouldn't even boot. Unfortunately, he couldn't have bothered to clean up the disgusting stains on the carpet, walls, and under his desk. I bought one of those blacklight things that shows bodily fluids. Everywhere in the office was clean, except under his desk, on his walls, and all over his computer. And my computer. And my secretary's computer, chair, and filing cabinet. Everywhere. Next story. Old mate was a dangerous, unstable, drug-addicted nutjob, but he worked his effing ass off and constantly made the rest of the crew laugh. Until the ice got the better of him, and he started really going off the rails. He'd snap, act like a lunatic, swing off motor chains, but I liked him. Now, I wasn't in charge of the hiring and firing, I was just the team leader of the crew. I'd tell the real boss over and over again that he had to get rid of him before he'd hurt someone who looked at him sideways, or drove over someone on the forklift. He did eventually quit the job, and I can tell you I've never been so relieved. We genuinely liked each other, and I was one of the few people in his life who could tell him what to do, primarily because I'd earned his respect, and respect was the only currency he acknowledged. And the second last time that I had heard of him, he'd taken a picture of himself sitting on the bonnet of his new car holding an illegal firearm, and then posted it onto Facebook. The last time was when an acquaintance told me he had been thrown into jail. Next story. Angry. So, many years ago, I ran an email helpline for an ISP. The company never actually made me a manager, but there were 9 full-time staff and 3 part-timers taking orders from me. One of them, who I never saw because he worked nights, wrote replies to customer emails that bordered on abusive. My manager had me redoing his work during the day and told me not to speak to him about it. I assumed they were using the opportunity to build an HR case against him, but they never took any action. He just went on like that until years later when he resigned to take a job with a different company. Next story. The worst employee I've known is a girl who told me she hated waking up to come to work. So in order to sleep longer in the morning, she would put her clothes on the night before and sleep in them and roll out of bed and then come straight to work. She never wore pants, only thick leggings under heavy skirts. She lived with her parents and their 20 cats and would always be covered in hair. She didn't brush her hair and always wore a beanie, even inside. She eventually got fired due to it as she was a sales rep for our company. Next story. As the manager of a communication agency, I'd say toxic people. Workers that always believe the company is scheming something, that does whatever is possible for coworkers to distrust the company and so on. We had one of those with us for 1.5 years. It was horrible. She contaminated good workers, told outright lies about things that we had offered her, faked her salary so her peers would think she earned much more, amongst other things. In the end, we fired her, but her contamination led us to fire 2 other people who believed her and started redoing her toxic work. And no matter how many times we told them the things she told them were lies, they wouldn't believe it. Next story. I've worked with some terrible people. However, terrible people usually do terrible things against company policy and get fired. Then there are the annoying people who don't F up that badly and just linger to annoy more. These are some of their stories. B is an 18-year-old on his first job. I was his manager, but I didn't actually have a hand in hiring him. B's job involved catching fish for customers and putting them in a bag, then closing the bag with a rubber band. B could not work rubber bands. It was like the "what are potatoes" guy from Reddit history, but he really must never have encountered a single rubber band in his life. And no matter how many times I and others showed him how to use rubber bands, he just couldn't do it. Then there is A. It has come to my attention that A may have had an autism spectrum disorder, but as that person had no qualifications to diagnose anyone besides "I read it on the internet," aka the Jenny McCarthy degree, I'm not sure. Anyway, A creeped customers and coworkers alike. We were all instructed to use the word assistance rather than the word help because our surveys asked if we offered assistance, and our surveys turned out better if we used the words the survey used. This resulted in A approaching customers, shoulders hunched up to his ears because of something, and then he would say, "Hi, can I offer you assistance?" And nobody wanted assistance from him. Then one time, A once overheard a female associate complaining of pain. She was not talking to him, but he jumped right in and said, "Is it cramps? My mom and I are close, so I know about periods." Why, God? Why? Then A once pissed off an entire department by making small talk. And what was this small talk? He said, "You guys should clean better," followed by a nervous chuckle, and he would go stop by their department every chance he could to make more small talk. It got so bad that I gave that department permission to tell A he needed to face something. Then there was D. We live in the South, and wrestling is pretty popular here. D adored wrestlers. It was nearly all she would talk about. All she would talk about was how she didn't have a boyfriend currently because she was waiting for someone who looked like and had the body of John Cena. And do you remember of the John Cena potato salad thing that happened on Reddit a while ago? I once told her about the r/John Cena Reddit joke thing, and she got offended. Then, whenever a customer would come to check out, before even saying hello, D would say, "Hi, that'll be $1 million. Every single effing time. We had several regulars complain about this, and we had people who worked there avoid making their own purchases if D was on the register. Then it quickly became known that you could not let D know where you lived. A couple of people had invited her over for a party or some such, and then she took it upon herself to drop by whenever she felt like it. Having an intimate night with your wife? Well, here's some D. And she once dropped by a manager's house to watch wrestling, and our company has a strict fraternization policy between managers and associates. And apparently, since that guy's cousin had the body of John Cena supposedly, she spent the whole time making him increasingly uncomfortable, repeatedly hitting on him. Then there is C. C is my actual boss, so I'm his employee. C was hired outside the company, and he had a retail manager experience, so all he really needed to do was learn our policies and procedures and our software, etc. There were learning modules for him to do, but he was also supposed to learn from his immediate subordinate and from other store managers in the company. Well, he didn't listen to a damn thing. He is a salaried manager, so he doesn't have to clock in or clock out, and his contract stipulates that he works 40 hours a week. Whatever he's getting paid with the assumption he's at the store full-time. He is not, because C loves golf. If it's golfing weather, he leaves early or just doesn't come in at all. When he is in, he stays in the office and watches golfing videos. He also micromanages whenever he can. Our scheduling program automatically schedules people, but also allows us to do it by hand. When I do it, I type in the time of the shift and press enter to go to the next day of week for that associate. It gets me to where I need to be. But C presses tab, not enter. It does the same thing, but apparently I'm doing it wrong. C also gets very offended if someone asks an associate to do something when he has already asked that associate to do something, even if the second person doesn't know about the first thing. C just has to win, because he's the guy in charge. So when he gave someone a task and another person asked that associate to perform a different task that was extremely important and had to be finished first for the safety of our animals in our store, C countermanded that and told the associate that whatever he says goes, which is understandable, but C didn't listen about our policies. He risked injuring our pets by not knowing why the pets needed to be taken care of first. Then, after the district manager received several complaints from multiple associates about C's behavior, she came for a visit. After the visit, C wanted to explain to me why he did what he did that got complained about. He rightly guessed that I'd snitched on his lazy ass, and I let him know that playing golf when he needed to be in the store had really pissed me off. And he told me that as store manager, he wasn't going to be in the store if everything is running smoothly, which his boss said wasn't happening. He also said that as store manager, he shouldn't have to deal with customers ever. He should leave before we get a lot of customers during the day. This is also known as not coming to work or leaving early to go play golf. Continuing, C is also obsessed with group texts. Former manager had one group text for all managers. Since February, C has created at least 8 group texts for managers for various reasons. I say at least because I've been off work since May dealing with leukemia, and I know he's created at least 3 more group texts that don't involve me. In fact, I found this out by creating a group text that dropped an associate from the manager group text. She should not have been included in the first place. And then C immediately started a different group text to say that it was basically my fault for needing a new group text because I wasn't using the right one, that he started, that no longer included that associate, and hadn't included me because I had no idea. And then went on to say he should start an additional group text the next day. And even though he apparently had 2 groups that had everyone it needed, besides me, and no one it didn't, that associate, it was so bad while I was still involved that I muted that group so I wouldn't have to hear it beep. And finally, we have C violating federal law. If you clock in or out immediately after somebody else, the time clock may not recognize it because you didn't wait 5 seconds for it to go back to the right screen. I believe this happened to me one day. I had no idea I had not clocked out for a shift, and my time for the week was missing 6 hours that I had worked. Easy enough to fix though, but C told another manager that if I expected to get paid, I had to clock in and out. Oh hell effing no. I get paid whether or not I clock in and out. I may get fired for not following policy when clocking in and out if I do it often enough to cause problems, but I get paid for whatever time I work. I know it's a pain to call someone and ask them what time they left when you were doing payroll, but it has to be done. And even if he was going to wait for me to notice it, he has absolutely no business telling someone else that if I expect to get paid, I have to clock in and out. That's not something to discuss with anyone else. I feel like OP here just really needed to vent, which I get it. You know, you got leukemia, you have the worst boss ever, worst superior ever. I was kind of hoping that the story would end with C getting a piano dropping on his head or just exploding or something. But you know what? I guess we'll just have to leave it to our own imaginations. Next story. So, not a boss or manager, but there was a point where I worked for this electronics retail company that I was respected as one. There was this dude who worked for the company for about 6 years. He was going to school, so promotions were out of the question for him. At one point, he was the pride and joy of management because he never took the customer's crap and was a great salesman. However, when it came to new people who did something better than him, he would get jealous. It got to the point where he would train the new guys wrong so that he could get their sales and then have them viewed as terrible employees by management. It wasn't until I came along. He tried to teach me incorrectly, but I would always go around and ask other people just in case. So it got to the point where I would pretend to listen to him and just do my job correctly. He would tell lies to the employees, even experienced ones, so that he could take their sales. He even tried bull crap to new management so that his sales would increase. I called him out on his BS though eventually during a company-wide meeting, and he wanted to fight me. A week later, he quits his job, pretended to say he got a better job because he graduated school, then came back a year later because he was broke as a joke. Next story. So I was on the receiving end in this case. I was working at a Thai restaurant. I didn't have a whole lot of experience, but most of the employees were from Thailand, and they needed a front man who spoke good English. One day, not many people were coming in, so one of the managers asked me in busted up English to help cut chicken. Medium thin pieces, not much instruction. So I followed the other sous chef's examples, and apparently that was too thick. Well, the manager came back in and lost it. She started by loudly saying they were too thick while holding up fistfuls of raw chicken and throwing a few pieces on the floor and in the sink like a 4-year-old. I could see customers coming to the front, so I told her we'll continue this later, but she blocked the exit and continued to rant. Next, she paced around the kitchen while grumbling and pulling at her hair with raw chicken-covered hands, ignoring the line of customers. Eventually, she sent the sous chef, who didn't speak much English, to the front and demanded I stir a big pot of soup for the rest of the day. As I was stirring the soup, she went back to chastising me in some language I couldn't understand, pacing and grumbling in a tone your parents may have used when you pissed the bed at the age of 3. She then looked at the chicken on the cutting board and then turned to me and said, "We can't let the boss see this." She then proceeded to pick up pieces of chicken, toss them onto the drain in the middle of the kitchen floor, and started waffle stomping them through the grate. And then I angrily told her to stop it, but she shot back to me with, "Back to pot," in a glass-shattering voice and continued to stomp the chicken down the drain. After she had stomped a bunch of chicken down the drain, it clogged, so she waddled over to the sink and started mashing pieces of chicken down that drain with her greasy palm. She harassed me for the rest of the day and kept coming back up to me with pieces of chicken in her hands, then holding them inches from my face and yelling about how thick they were. As she started angrily hacking away at the rest of the chicken with a cleaver, she kept muttering, "If our boss was here, he would say you're fired," is what he would say. And then, when people out front ordered chicken dishes, I heard her apologizing. "Oh, I so sorry, the chicken's so ugly. That effer cut it so bad. I not know why our boss not fire him." Eventually, our boss does come back, and here's what he sees. The soup I'm stirring is burnt, and none of the dishes are done. I tried a few times to turn the soup off and start the dishes, but she'd come back charging back in, brandishing a rice paddle, screeching, "Back to pot, back to pot." Also, the sous chef, who doesn't speak English, is out front having a terrible day. The manager tried to cover her ass, but our boss went through the security footage and saw the whole thing. He told the sous chef and I we could leave early, and we heard them yelling in some language I couldn't understand as we left. The next day, the health inspector came. Imagine his surprise when he walked into the smell of rotting chicken while 2 employees were fishing mangled pieces of chicken out of the floor and sink drain. The inspector nearly reported the restaurant, and the current manager was fired soon thereafter. Next story. I work in a liquor store. One guy didn't show up for 3 days and had his mom come in and apologize. A month later, we started finding empty beer cans throughout the fridge at the end of each shift. He would also leave at random times for 15 minutes without telling anyone. And he would do this for pints at the adjoining bar or ask for cigarettes in the alley, or probably to go drink more of our booze. Next story. I was the team leader and I was supposed to mentor this beautiful girl, which made my friends jealous why they didn't get to. Well, she found me on Facebook and sent me a friend request within an hour of meeting. We had things in common like Harry Potter and English Premier League, although I support Chelsea and she's Manchester United. Big red flag, which I missed. And she used to chat with me late evenings about common topics, come with me for lunch and coffee, and even hang out a bit on weekends as she was new to the city. But the biggest problem was that she was so dumb that even if I spent an hour explaining, she would mess up coding another one, so similar to it. It's like you explain someone 2 + 3 = 5, and then they can't add 3 + 2. I guess she was selected only based on looks. And I had to cover for her work too. I straight up told my manager, but he said to give her time, and she didn't improve. She constantly would complain that she can't concentrate, as she was missing her family. After 3 months, I thought enough is enough and recommended her to be moved to testing, and she moved on to another project, which was closer to her hometown, and she stopped talking to me after that. Dang, not only was OP used, OP was used by the dumb girl. That's gotta hurt a little. But I suppose OP can take pride in the fact that his IQ is not room temperature, unlike the person he was just talking about, so there's that. But anyway, next story. So, I work as an English teacher in Japan teaching at elementary schools. It's really simple basic English, and the job really just involves playing games with the kids using English. It's also my job to train in new staff. So the new guy comes over to my place and I go through 4 weeks of lesson plans in great detail and tell him just to follow them to the letter and he'll be fine. Once he finds his feet, he'll be able to make his own lesson plans. Then next week I get an email from my boss saying all his schools complained about his lessons, saying they were too difficult for the students and he was arguing with the homeroom teachers. So I arranged to meet him again to follow up, and I asked him what had happened. He said he forgot what I had told him to do and hadn't taken enough notes. When I asked him why he didn't call me, he said, "Oh yeah, maybe I should have done that." And he also seems to think that it's the fault of the Japanese education system if they think his lessons are too difficult. Skip for 3 months, and this has been a pattern. I'm interviewing for his replacement this weekend. Next story. Was a manager at a fast food place for a while. You'd think my worst would have been some teenager that slacked off or didn't listen. Mind you, I'm only 24. I was 19 to 21 as manager, and this new employee did not like that I, a child as she put it, was above her. She would constantly undermine my authority, and I wasn't a micromanager or even got loud. My way was, "Hey, do you want to check on the lobby?" Not demanding, but asking nicely. That's how I was trained by my manager, and I would get, "No, I don't," instead of "Nah, but sure." So I started saying, "Hey, I spotted a few dirty tables, could you take care of it?" Eventually, I appealed to the owners that she should have a talk with us privately about her attitude and unwillingness to accept me as her manager. In the talk, she made it very clear that she would not ever accept a teenager, key word, as her superior. I was 20, but I do look younger. When we explained I was well out of high school, her attitude flipped. Suddenly, she was like, "Oh, so you're an adult? That's okay then." We still let her go for blatant disregard of authority, though. That, and she was lazy as crap anyway. Next story. When I first interviewed the girl, she showed up in flip-flops, a tube top, and short shorts. I absolutely flat-out refused her because it was so unprofessional. Working for a university, I don't need someone showing up to work and being an ambassador for the dorms like that. She tried throwing out the race card. Yes, I am white, she was black, and I told her unequivocally, no. It's because you look like you're headed out for a night on the town, and I don't want that image for my students or dorms. I don't care what you do in your own time, but if this is how you show up for a job interview, you are obviously unprofessional and unqualified. She then threw a huge fit and left in a huff, and the other managers backed up my decision. The next year, she reapplied, and I was sick. She got hired by a person who only hired black people, not people of color in general, and did so regardless of how they presented themselves or their qualifications. And she hated me so much, she tried to get me fired. I ended up getting her thrown out eventually. And well, I was right. That girl almost never showed up for shifts, often did coverage beforehand, would show up drunk and not do the work, or in some nasty clothes that were not appropriate. She got fired less than a month in because of these things. Other than her, I'd never had a problem with my hires, though. Next story. Not an employer, but still above this guy. So this guy's been working there for 30 plus years. Breaks are meant to be 20 minutes. He goes 10 minutes early and is always 10 minutes late coming back, meaning we are waiting on him as his job is vital to the work process in order to continue. We'll just walk off mid-work at least 5 to 6 times a day and disappear for 15 minutes and come back with cakes, etc. from a shop halfway across town. If something goes wrong with his machine, he stands there, stares at it for 10 minutes before walking off, comes back 30 minutes later to see if it's fixed itself instead of calling maintenance. I have made a number of complaints, and here we are 4 years later, and they won't touch him. Pretty sure he has some dirt and blackmails someone high up because he doesn't really do anything. Also, he's known to clock in on weekends, go home, come back 6 hours later, and clock out. Next story. It's a cross between the heroin addict who I used to work with a few years ago and the effing imbecile that I work with now. So the heroin addict would show up 10 to 15 minutes late high, go to the store across the street where he would meet up with his dealer to buy more heroin, come back, go to the bathroom to do the heroin, and spend the next 3 to 5 hours falling apart. He would call the owner at least once per shift to cry, literally tears and whining included, about his life. And the owner was apparently the combined reincarnation of Jesus, Buddha, and Gandhi, because it took us forever to get this MF fired. Then current dip crap is entirely useless. It takes him 2 to 3 times as long as anyone else to complete any single task, including the new kid we hired 3 weeks ago. He has no hustle, will work with a single customer at the same snail's pace that he works at when there's a line out the door, and what's worse, this dumb idiot is technically a manager. He has a key and code for the alarm, and has no comprehension of his mediocrity. Why is he still here? Well, long story short, he and my boss met through a support group. So my boss feels sorry enough for him that he won't fire him for crap. So I'm forced to give this guy hours that would better suit anyone else, and if I go too long without giving him a manager shift, he gets all effing whiny. Also, he seems to think that the reason everyone hates him, he's not completely oblivious, just mostly, is because he's gay and we're all homophobic. No, I don't care about the literal private parts that you suck, just the metaphorical ones, buddy. Okay, slightly problematic, not enough to get canceled on Twitter, and such a cacophony of words that I have not heard it phrased before. I would give that burn a 75 out of 100. Well done, OP. Next story. So, not an employer, but I helped catch this guy. I was working for a temp agency in the 90s, and they sent me to a business center. It had been a small mall in the 80s, now turned into 4 to 5 businesses in the same space, sharing the general facilities, lunchroom, copy machines, etc. And I was brought on as a tech, as these businesses really weren't big enough to have their own IT departments. I was told that the previous guy in the position, Joe, left for a more stable job, and everyone in the place was sorry to see him go. Well, the first week I was there, I started finding problems with the guy. I came into one place and was told a computer was acting up. The business owner looked like she was about to burst into tears, and she said when the last computer did this, Joe said it was broken and she had to get a new computer. I fixed the problem in 5 minutes with a free antivirus program and set up the rest of the computers in that office up as well. Then I asked her, what did Joe do with the old computer? Oh, he took it home for parts since it wouldn't work anymore. And all that week, I kept running into things that were really simple fixes. But good old Joe would either take all freaking day fixing them or announce that the machine was borked and had to be replaced. And Joe was apparently the designated recycler. One owner said Joe was always in the office, working on the system. He'd be all day working on that computer. Turns out that before he'd left, he'd tried really hard to convince the owner to turn that tower over to Joe, and Joe would replace it for free, but the owner decided not to do that. He told me he just didn't trust Joe all that much. And after taking a look at the computer, I could see why Joe wanted to take it with him. It was full of adult content grabbed from the internet. After showing this to the owner, Joe became persona non grata at this place. But it gets better. Turns out Joe couldn't hack it in the real world and ended up going back to the temp agency. He asked for his old job back, but no, I had that position. So he came to the facility and tried to bug me into quitting. I reported him to the agency and he was written up and told not to return to the facility for any reason. And when he did return to the facility, I informed building management, who called the police. Joe, upon seeing the popos, took off like a cheetah trying to exit the building through the back door, but failing because it now had a lock on it due to a break-in a few months previous. After trying and failing to resist arrest, the cops call in a request for his records and find out Joe is wanted in suspicion for dealing. I had been talking to the cops at the time, and upon hearing this, I had my own suspicions. So I went to check that computer that Joe had spent so much time on. Sure enough, hidden in the files was a partial record of Joe's activities back when he had worked there. I printed out the file, handed it to the cops, and told them I'd send them anything else I found on the computer. The next day, the feds showed up and took the whole computer. Joe went to prison for 5 years. Next story. The one that sent a PowerPoint presentation with pictures of dead babies to a client. And not just regular dead babies, but dead babies in jars and looking all deformed. She was also the one that complained about how wrong it is for white man to experiment on the black people in Africa. This was during the big Ebola outbreak, and she was talking about the experimental vaccine. Then I asked her something along the lines of, would you prefer them not to provide the experimental vaccine and hopefully save lives? Wouldn't you just be saying those damn white men not sharing the vaccine with the blacks in Africa, they clearly hate us and racism and all that? And she said that was an interesting point, and she would have to think about it. Next story. Oh man, I have a few of these. There was the guy who borrowed the company car with the logo on it in the middle of the night. Yes, he was drunk. Yes, he crashed it. Yes, he was arrested. And oh, his passengers were 3 other workers. They were all a-holes. Then back in university, I worked at a terrible pizza place, and since I was the only one who didn't have a criminal record and actually showed up on time, I was made a part-time manager. There was the guy who, on the one occasion I had to get him to lock up the pizza place, was caught breaking in to steal cheese and meat. There's more, but I don't think I would have enough time to think about it because much of them were just my colleagues and I wasn't the manager. Frequent drinking and smoking weed on the job, while others I was managing. I've seen so many crappy workers before. Next story. My coworker at a dog daycare I work with leaves the dogs unsupervised, lies about injuries, gets whiny with clients, stole money recently out of the donation box for charity, left 3 hours early one day to leave me alone in a building with 20 dogs, etc., etc. And my boss shields this kid. It's always his last warning and final chance, but next time he F's up, he cries his way out of it. The boss lets everything slide with minor repercussions. And the boss abuses him too, I guess. He's an excellent clean freak and keeps the place spotless. He will work over the time limit and not get paid extra for it. I don't think he notices this, and he kisses the boss's ass. Next story. I used to be the worst when I was younger in the sense that a job didn't mean anything to me because of financial security and knowing if I left my job, I wouldn't be out in the street since I was living with family. So I would be the laziest worker. I'd take 10 to 15-minute trips to the bathroom, be on my phone, hide in the back, barely remember how to do any tasks because it wasn't worth my time to remember. I feel for any manager I had at the time because I'd get bored, put in my 2 weeks notification, and then immediately ghost on everyone. It was stupid, and I've learned to be a lot more responsible and respectful since then, and I cringe every time thinking about how frustrating it must have been to work with an apathetic teenager. Next story. I worked in a call center with an older lady in her 50s perhaps while I was in my 20s. We started out as co-workers and didn't particularly get along well, but it was never really a problem. She didn't get along with a lot of people, so I was in good company anyway. I ended up getting promoted to be her manager. There were a number of managers and we shuffled teams every month or two, but she was one of the people on my first team when I first got promoted. She didn't get along with any of the other managers either, but I was the new guy and she was used to seeing me as a peer. The first time I sat with her for coaching, she told me, "I have to be blunt with you, I never respect people that are younger than me." And I breezed by telling her something like she was a smart, competent person and I was sure she would learn to overcome that prejudice. I was a bit shocked that she'd be so openly insubordinate though. She was the kind of person who knew all of the rules and all of the employment standards, or thought she did, and would do her best to use them to get her way, or sometimes just inconvenience the company with if she could figure out a way to. She was a very bitter person. As an example, if we had candy out at one point for everyone or for little prizes, she'd file a formal complaint with our HR department that we had discriminated against her by not having anything for her since she was diabetic. HR told her we hadn't actually done anything wrong, but when they told us about the complaint, we went and got some sugar-free candies as well. She didn't eat any, and it was a sales job, and we had a commission structure as well for all the employees, and at some point she learned that it was illegal for us to pay a commission for sales to the employees that was less than the commission paid to the company by our client. I don't know if there's even any truth to this, but we sat down with her and explained the part of our contract with the client about commissions for individual sales to show her it was actually less than what we paid out to individual employees. Basically, the client paid us more for staff and less for the actual results. Seeing her reaction as something she had gotten all fired up about and was planning to take us to court for was priceless. She would also try to get people to flock to her banner, claiming we treated them poorly. But we did our best to treat everyone well and fairly. I'm sure our account treated our employees better than many of the other teams within the same company. Most people just ignored her, knowing that they had a number of perks that people from other accounts did not have. She also had migraines a lot, enough that I started to doubt they were always real. They would spring up on Fridays and nice days during the summer or when she was scheduled to work on a weekend. There wasn't really anything we could do though. Even if we wanted to press her for a doctor's note, I'm sure her doctor would write a note without hesitation. We couldn't really prove she was faking anything, and she may not have been, but she liked to F with us. So it was hard to believe all these well-timed sick days or half days were legit. To this day, I still roll my eyes internally whenever someone says they've got a migraine and wonder if it's as fake as the time they called in sick and told me they had a 24-hour flu when they're back at work and fine the next day. She was never as blatantly rude to me as she was that first time I sat down with her again, but she did try and play games of office politics until the two of us went separate ways. She was usually pretty polite, but always trying to craft some kind of scheme behind our backs. She made really great deviled eggs though whenever we had potlucks, and I always ate them and thanked her and told her how great they were. I just hope she didn't do anything with them to F with me. Next story. I supervise a bunch of writers for web content. We're in a corporate setting but aren't required to wear a monkey suit to work. Just any shirt with a collar and jeans is fine, and on Fridays we get to wear t-shirts. Well, this one guy is like almost 9 years older than me, and I am his supervisor. He is the worst guy I have ever had the misfortune to work with. His workstation is filled with clutter. He looks like he never showers. When he comes up to talk to me, his breath smells like a ton of bricks. I had to work really hard not to look away because it stank that bad. When he gets to work, he takes off his sneakers and walks around the office in just his socks like he owns the place. And I could have lived with all of that, but he never turns in his work. He practically lives in the office but never listens to me or the director or does work. All he does is be on Twitter doing God knows what side job he has, and we finally got his ass fired just last month. It took them nearly 2 years to fire that guy. Next story. I had an employee who would show up, then leave after an hour. His average shift length was 2 hours. He was scheduled full-time. It was the night shift, so the head managers either didn't believe me or refused to fire him for some reason. They kept saying they couldn't find a replacement. Unfortunately for me, my ability to fire somebody was stripped from my position company-wide like 6 months prior. All expulsions needed to be brought to my boss first. I did, however, have the ability to send people home in extreme circumstances. I exercised this several times when the employee became combative to the point of screaming and cussing when I asked him to do simple tasks. My bosses refused to stick up for me or to punish him in any way and made that job into an effing nightmare. I eventually quit and they begged me to come back because none of the other managers wanted to work the night shift. That company deserves it. Screw them. Big fat L. If you guys want to have the guy who clocks in for 2 hours, go ahead and see how that works out for you. Remember, folks, don't kill the golden goose. But anyway, folks, what relevant stories, if any, do you have? Feel free to share them in the comments and talk about them. I don't feel like I have any relevant stories. I've never been a manager. Not like half the commenters weren't managers anyway. But anyway, folks, thank you all so much for watching, commenting. Have a really good day, and bye-bye.